The moment David Letterman walked onto the voice stage with his iconic gap-toothed grin and legendary deadpan delivery, everyone expected television gold. But what nobody in that studio was prepared for was witnessing one of America's greatest late-night legends completely collapse on live television, proving that sometimes the people who've entertained us for decades carry trauma that can strike without warning. What happened next will show you that even the toughest entertainers have moments when their mortality catches up with them in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe now because this moment will change everything you think you know about the man who redefined late night television. David had come to The Voice that Thursday evening for what was supposed to be a nostalgic celebrity guest segment. The producers had invited him to mentor 22-year-old Sarah Chen, a powerhouse vocalist from Chicago who had been struggling with stage anxiety, bringing his decades of experience handling live television pressure to help guide her through a crucial performance. The plan was perfectly suited to David's strengths, use his unflappable calm and dry wit to help Sarah understand that mistakes weren't disasters, share some wisdom about connecting with audiences, and probably deliver a few of his trademark sarcastic observations that would have everyone in the studio laughing. Sarah had chosen to perform an emotional ballad about survival and resilience. It was supposed to be an inspiring performance about overcoming obstacles, something that would benefit from David's guidance about finding strength in vulnerability. David sat in the red coach chair that had been set up for him, chatting in his familiar Midwest monotone with Blake Shelton about Sarah's upcoming performance. His presence was calming and authoritative, as always, the kind of steady energy that had made him America's most trusted late-night host for over 3 decades. Sarah reminds me of the countless performers I've worked with over the years, David told Blake with his characteristic, understated delivery. Talented, but overthinking everything. Sometimes the best performances happen when you stop trying so hard to be perfect and just let yourself be human. Blake was clearly enjoying David's perspective and legendary calm. That's exactly what she needs to hear. She's got incredible talent, but she's so worried about making mistakes that she's not letting her personality shine through. As Sarah took the stage, David leaned back in his chair with relaxed confidence, ready to offer the kind of practical, no-nonsense advice that had helped countless performers over his legendary career. Sarah began to sing, her voice powerful and technically skilled as she delivered lyrics about fighting through darkness and refusing to give up. Her performance was strong but tense, exactly the kind of controlled approach that David was there to help her move beyond. David was nodding approvingly, clearly impressed by Sarah's vocal ability, but also recognizing the tension that was keeping her from fully connecting with the audience. But as Sarah continued singing about surviving life-threatening situations and finding the will to keep fighting, something began to change in David's expression. The lyrics about medical emergencies, about lying in hospital beds, feeling helpless, about the moment when you realize how fragile life really is, were triggering memories that David had spent years trying to process, but never fully putting behind him. David's relaxed posture became rigid. His famous gap-toothed smile disappeared entirely as Sarah's words about facing death and feeling your body fail. You reached something deep and terrifying in David's memory that he had worked desperately to forget. I thought I was dying, couldn't breathe, couldn't fight, Sarah sang, completely unaware that her lyrics were hitting David like a series of physical blows. Suddenly, David's legendary composure began to crumble. His face went pale, his breathing became shallow, and his usually steady hands began to shake as he was transported back to February 2000, when a massive heart attack had nearly ended his life. I can't, David whispered, his famous voice barely audible as he gripped the arms of his chair. This is bringing it all back. Sarah, still performing, noticed David's distress, and her own voice began to waver as she saw the usually unflappable host struggling with what looked like a panic attack. The mentoring segment was turning into something much more frightening and vulnerable than anyone had anticipated. David suddenly stood up from his chair, but immediately clutched his chest and stumbled. The emotional trauma of reliving his near-death experience, combined with the physical stress of the panic response, caused him to collapse onto the stage floor. "I thought I was going to die on that hospital table," David gasped, his voice filled with terror as he was mentally transported back to the most frightening moment of his life. Alone and afraid, feeling my heart failing, thinking I'd never see my family again. Blake immediately signaled for the music to stop and was running toward David before anyone else could react, recognizing that this wasn't just emotional distress, but potentially a medical emergency. "David," Blake said urgently as he reached him, "look at me. You're safe. You're not in that hospital. Stay with us." But David was lost in the traumatic memory that Sarah's song had triggered, experiencing the same terror and helplessness he had felt over 20 years ago when his heart had nearly given out. The pain in my chest, the machines beeping, the doctors' faces telling me how close I came to dying. I can still feel it all. Blake knelt beside David, understanding that he was experiencing a full panic attack triggered by traumatic memories. "David, breathe with me, in and out. You survived that. You're here. You're alive. You're safe." The studio had fallen completely silent as everyone processed what they were witnessing. This was David Letterman, the man who had maintained his cool through thousands of live television shows, being completely overwhelmed by memories of his own mortality. "I never dealt with it properly," David said through gasping breaths. "I went back to work, made jokes about it, pretended it was just another story to tell on the show. But the truth is, I've been terrified every single day since then that it could happen again." Blake helped David to a more comfortable position, checking his pulse and making sure he was physically stable. "David, that fear is normal. You went through something traumatic. But look around you. You're surrounded by people who care about you, and you're very much alive." "But for how long?" David asked, his voice filled with the existential terror that had haunted him since his heart attack. "Every chest pain, every moment of fatigue, every time my heart skips a beat, I think this is it. This is when my luck runs out." Kelly Clarkson, watching from her chair, was openly emotional. "David, you've lived more than 20 years since that happened. You've brought joy to millions of people, created countless memories with your family. That's not luck, that's life." John Legend added, his voice gentle but firm, "Surviving something like that doesn't just mean your heart kept beating. It means you found reasons to keep living, keep creating, keep connecting with others." Sarah, still standing at the microphone, was watching the scene unfold with tears in her own eyes. "Mr. Letterman," she said softly, "I chose that song because I survived something too. A car accident that should have killed me. Maybe we're both here for a reason." David looked up at Sarah, seeing his own experience with mortality reflected in her young face. "How do you deal with it?" David asked. "How do you perform? How do you live when you know how quickly it can all end?" "By remembering that surviving means I get to do this," Sarah replied, gesturing to the stage, the audience, the moment they were sharing. "I get to sing, to connect with people, to maybe help someone else who's afraid." David's breathing began to slow as he focused on Sarah's words and Blake's steady presence beside him. "I've spent 20 years trying not to think about that night in the hospital, making jokes about my heart surgery, turning it into comedy material so I wouldn't have to deal with how terrified I was." Blake squeezed David's shoulder supportively. "David, there's nothing wrong with being afraid of death. That fear proves you value life. And look at what you've done with the time you were given. You've entertained millions. You've been there for your family. You've left a legacy that will outlast any of us. But what if it happens again?" David asked, voicing the fear that had been controlling his life for over 2 decades. Blake looked directly into David's eyes. "Then you'll face it the same way you faced it before, with courage, surrounded by people who love you. But right now, in this moment, your heart is beating strong, you're breathing, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Blake stood up and helped David to his feet, making sure he was steady. "David, would you like to hear Sarah finish her song? I think both of you might benefit from hearing a song about survival sung by someone who truly understands what that means." David nodded slowly, understanding that this moment was about more than just his own fear. "Sarah, I'm sorry for interrupting your performance. Would you mind singing that song again? I think I need to hear it differently this time." As Sarah began to sing again, David listened with new ears, hearing not just lyrics about medical trauma, but understanding the deeper message about finding strength after surviving something that should have destroyed you. Her voice carried new meaning as she sang about resilience, about the choice to keep living fully despite knowing how fragile life can be, about finding purpose in the bonus time that survival gives you. When Sarah finished, the applause was profound and respectful, recognizing that they had witnessed something real about the human experience of facing mortality and choosing to keep living despite the fear. David walked to Sarah and embraced her, both survivors who had found ways to transform their brushes with death into reasons to create beauty for others. "Thank you," David whispered. "You reminded me that surviving isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying alive for something." The segment became one of the most powerful moments in television history, sparking conversations about trauma, survival, and the way fear of death can either paralyze us or motivate us to live more fully. David later said that the experience changed his relationship with his own mortality. "I realized that night that I hadn't been living since my heart attack. I'd been existing in fear of dying. Sarah taught me that survival is a gift that comes with the responsibility to make it meaningful, because sometimes the people who seem the most unshakable are the ones carrying the deepest fears. Sometimes surviving something traumatic means learning to live with the knowledge of our own fragility. And sometimes a song about resilience can remind us that every heartbeat is a chance to create something beautiful with the time we've been given."